Stop whatever you are doing, because what you are about to hear is not a drill, not a simulation, and not the kind of geopolitical speculation that gets walked back by morning. At precisely 0347 hours Zulu time, the Islamic Republic of Iran activated an electromagnetic warfare capability so advanced, so devastating, and so completely beyond what Western intelligence agencies believe possible that 300 Israeli combat aircraft, representing nearly 70% of the Israeli Air Force's operational fighter inventory, are currently sitting on tarmacs across 6 air bases, unable to perform their primary mission. The jets are physically intact. The pilots are unharmed. The munitions are loaded. But the aircraft cannot fly combat operations because their electronic warfare suites, their navigation systems, their targeting pods, and their communication arrays have been rendered effectively useless by an Iranian electromagnetic attack that penetrated defensive countermeasures that cost the Israeli taxpayer $11 billion to develop and deploy. This is not theoretical vulnerability being discussed in classified briefings. This is operational reality unfolding right now across Israeli airspace. The number of aircraft affected: 300 combat jets, including F-35I Otter 5th-generation stealth fighters, F-15I Ram strike aircraft, and F-16I Sufa multi-role fighters, exceeds the entire combat aviation inventory of most NATO member states. Iran has just demonstrated the capability to neutralize Israeli air superiority without firing a single kinetic weapon, without launching a single missile, without sending a single drone across contested airspace. They have done it through electromagnetic spectrum dominance that Western defense planners believed was still a decade away from operational deployment by any adversary force. The timeline is catastrophic. Israeli defense officials are operating under the assessment that they have 12 hours to restore combat capability to enough aircraft to mount credible deterrent operations before regional adversaries recognize the vulnerability window and potentially exploit it. 12 hours to diagnose what went wrong across multiple aircraft types and electronic systems simultaneously. 12 hours to implement countermeasures against an attack vector that apparently bypassed every defensive layer. 12 hours to restore the air power edge that has been the cornerstone of Israeli military strategy for 7 decades. The geopolitical shockwave is already propagating through allied capitals. The Trump administration, barely 3 months into its second term, is facing its first genuine strategic crisis involving a core Middle Eastern ally, and the initial response has been characterized by sources close to the National Security Council as somewhere between confused and panicked. The fundamental assumptions underlying American security guarantees to Israel, that Israeli technological superiority would always provide sufficient deterrence, that Iranian capabilities remained confined to asymmetric harassment rather than strategic disruption, that the electromagnetic warfare domain remained under Western control, have been invalidated in a single coordinated operation that lasted less than 90 seconds of active transmission. If this channel has been giving you the analysis that cuts through the noise of official narratives and mainstream defense commentary, now is the moment to make sure you never miss an update. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with everyone in your network who is serious about understanding what is actually happening at the sharp edge of global power competition. The sanitized briefings that governments will provide over the coming days will systematically downplay both the severity of what has occurred and the implications for regional power balance. The analysis that follows breaks down every dimension of this event with the technical depth and strategic honesty that the moment demands. What Iran has just demonstrated is not simply a new weapon system. It is the operational deployment of capabilities that fundamentally alter the calculus of air warfare in contested electromagnetic environments. For decades, Western air forces have operated under the assumption that electronic warfare meant jamming enemy radars, spoofing missile seekers, and degrading command networks. Iran has just shown that electromagnetic attack can move beyond degradation to complete denial, not against individual systems, but against entire integrated platforms simultaneously. The immediate tactical picture is stark. At 6 Israeli Air Force bases, Nevatim, Ramon, Hatzarim, Tel Nof, Ramat David, and Hatzor, maintenance crews are working against the 12-hour deadline to restore functionality to aircraft that present no obvious physical damage, but exhibit systematic electronic failures across multiple full independent systems. The F-35I aircraft, which cost $110 million per unit and represent the most advanced stealth fighters in Israeli inventory, are experiencing cascading software failures that their manufacturers at Lockheed Martin have never documented in any previous operational scenario. The navigation systems are providing coordinates that drift by kilometers from actual position. The targeting pods are unable to maintain lock on stationary ground targets. The communication suites are generating encryption errors that prevent secure data link with command nodes. The F-15I and F-16I aircraft, which rely on different electronic architecture and were specifically upgraded with indigenous Israeli electronic warfare systems precisely to avoid single-point vulnerabilities, are exhibiting identical symptom patterns. This suggests the Iranian attack vector operates at a fundamental level beneath platform-specific countermeasures, potentially exploiting physics-based vulnerabilities in how electromagnetic signals interact with semiconductor components rather than attacking software or specific hardware implementations. Regional intelligence sources are reporting that the Iranian operation was conducted from mobile transmitter arrays positioned in western Iran, approximately 800 kilometers from Israeli airspace. The systems apparently achieved electromagnetic effect at that range, which implies either transmission power levels far exceeding what Western analysis believed Iranian generators could produce, or exploitation of atmospheric propagation channels that existing American and Israeli electromagnetic warfare doctrine does not adequately model. The strategic implications extend far beyond the immediate aircraft recovery timeline. Every regional adversary with intelligence collection capabilities now knows that Israeli air power, the ultimate guarantor of Israeli security and the primary instrument through which Israel has conducted offensive operations across the Middle East, can be degraded or denied through means that do not require matching Israel's technological sophistication aircraft for aircraft. Hezbollah knows it. Hamas knows it. The Houthis know it. Most critically, Iran knows it. And Iran now knows that Israel knows that Iran knows it. This knowledge asymmetry fundamentally changes deterrence dynamics. For Israeli decision makers contemplating preventive strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, the equation has shifted. Any such operation would require air superiority throughout the mission duration. And air superiority now appears to be a condition that Iran can contest not through conventional air defense, but through electromagnetic denial that Israeli forces have just proven they cannot currently counter. The window of vulnerability may be measured in hours for this specific incident, but the strategic vulnerability is permanent until Israel develops and deploys effective countermeasures against capabilities that they did not know existed until this morning. The American dimension adds additional complexity. President Trump built his first term's Middle East policy around unconditional support for Israel combined with maximum pressure on Iran. The administration's return to power was predicated on assumptions that American military technology and Israeli operational superiority created unassailable regional dominance. Those assumptions are being tested in real time, and the initial American response suggests deep uncertainty about how to respond to a strategic setback that does not fit traditional escalation frameworks. There are no American casualties. There has been no kinetic attack. Iran has not violated Israeli airspace. No international law has been clearly broken. Yet, Israeli military capability has been degraded more severely in 90 seconds of electromagnetic warfare than it was in 2 weeks of the 2006 Lebanon conflict. The Trump administration's policy toolkit, sanctions, military aid packages, diplomatic pressure, carrier strike group deployments seems inadequate to address a domain where Iran has just demonstrated unexpected sophistication and reach. Tonight's analysis takes you inside every dimension of this event. The technical architecture of the Iranian electromagnetic warfare capability and what it reveals about their research and development trajectory, the operational consequences for Israeli military planning and regional deterrence posture, the strategic implications for American security commitments and alliance credibility, the global order ramifications as other nations assess what this demonstration means for the electromagnetic warfare domain in future conflicts. This is the comprehensive breakdown that the moment demands and that official sources will not provide. The electromagnetic warfare system that Iran has just operationally deployed represents a convergence of technologies that Western intelligence services tracked individually but apparently failed to integrate into a comprehensive threat assessment. The system appears to be designated Moharibi Elektroniki in Iranian military nomenclature, which translates approximately to electronic combat system, though the capabilities being observed exceed what that generic designation might suggest. The core transmission architecture consists consists of mobile, phased-array emitter platforms that can generate coherent electromagnetic pulses across multiple frequency bands simultaneously. Western Signals Intelligence has tracked these emitter systems being transported across Iranian territory for approximately 18 months, but the assessed purpose was long-range radar for air defense applications rather than offensive electromagnetic attack. That assessment was catastrophically wrong. The emitters are not receiving systems, but transmission platforms capable of projecting electromagnetic energy with sufficient power density and precision to induce hardware-level failures in shielded military electronics at ranges exceeding 800 kilometers. The physics underlying this capability involve exploitation of what electronic warfare specialists term the electromagnetic backdoor problem. Modern combat aircraft incorporate thousands of sensors, antennas, and data links that must remain exposed to electromagnetic radiation in order to function. These are deliberate openings in the aircraft's electromagnetic shielding designed to receive friendly signals. Iranian engineers have apparently developed techniques to inject hostile signals through these intentional apertures with sufficient power and precision to overwhelm protective circuits and cause cascading failures in downstream systems. The specific attack mechanism appears to involve high-power microwave pulses modulated to match the resonant frequencies of common semiconductor components used in military avionics. When electromagnetic energy at precisely the right frequency and power level couples into electronic circuits through antenna apertures, it can induce voltage spikes that exceed component tolerances and cause permanent or temporary failures. The sophistication of the Iranian system lies not in generating high power. That is simply an engineering challenge involving large generators and transmission arrays, but in achieving the frequency precision and pulse shaping required to couple effectively through defensive filters and damage or degrade specific component types. The F-35I aircraft that Israeli Air Force operates are particularly vulnerable to this attack vector despite their advanced design, or perhaps because of it. The F-35 relies on tightly integrated sensor fusion, where multiple independent sensors feed data into central processors that create a unified battlespace picture. This architecture provides enormous tactical advantages in normal operation, but creates a single point of failure if the central processors can be disrupted. Iranian electromagnetic attack apparently induced processor resets or memory corruption that cascaded through the sensor fusion system, rendering the aircraft unable to perform combat operations, even though individual subsystems may remain functional. The F-15I and F-16I aircraft exhibited similar vulnerabilities despite different electronic architectures, suggesting Iranian attack waveforms are designed to affect multiple target types simultaneously, rather than being optimized against a single platform. This multi-platform effectiveness implies either extremely sophisticated understanding of common vulnerabilities across different aircraft designs or exploitation of fundamental physics that affects all semiconductor-based electronics regardless of specific implementation. The transmission power requirements for achieving these effects at 800-kilometer range are extraordinary. Electromagnetic energy propagates according to inverse square law, meaning power density decreases proportionally to the square of distance from the transmitter. To deliver sufficient power density at 800 kilometers to induce component failures requires either transmitter power in the megawatt range or exploitation of atmospheric ducting phenomena that can extend electromagnetic propagation range under specific conditions. Regional weather data from the time of the attack indicates atmospheric conditions that could support anomalous electromagnetic propagation, including temperature inversion layers that can create waveguide effects extending surface-based transmissions far beyond normal line-of-sight ranges. Iranian operators may have timed the attack to coincide with favorable propagation conditions that their meteorological analysis predicted would maximize transmission range and power delivery to target areas. The mobile platform architecture that Iran has deployed provides strategic flexibility that fixed installations cannot match. Western satellite reconnaissance can track fixed electromagnetic warfare sites and target them with precision munitions in any conflict scenario. Mobile emitters that can be repositioned between operations and concealed in hardened shelters, when not actively transmitting, present vastly more difficult targeting challenges. Israeli strike planning against these systems would require real-time intelligence on emitter locations during the brief windows when they are active and exposed, a collection and strike timeline that may exceed Israeli or American intelligence capabilities in Iranian territory. The defensive countermeasures that Israeli and American engineers will now rush to develop face fundamental constraints. Electromagnetic shielding that blocks hostile signals also blocks friendly communications and sensor returns that aircraft require to operate. Filtering that removes attack waveforms must distinguish hostile from friendly signals with perfect reliability while maintaining signal integrity for legitimate transmissions. Component hardening that increases tolerance to electromagnetic interference adds weight, complexity, and cost to aircraft that are already pushing performance limits. The timeline for developing and deploying effective countermeasures extends to months or years, not the hours that Israeli forces have to restore current operational capability. The immediate restoration efforts will focus on software patches that reset affected systems and diagnostic procedures to identify which aircraft have experienced permanent hardware damage versus recoverable software corruption. These measures may restore partial capability, but do not address the fundamental vulnerability that Iran has exploited. The research and development trajectory that enabled Iran to achieve this capability reveals systematic investment in electromagnetic warfare technologies over at least a decade, drawing on expertise from multiple sources. Iranian universities have produced substantial academic research on high-power microwave effects on electronics, providing the theoretical foundation. Defense industries have developed the precision pulse generators and phased array transmission systems required for implementation. Foreign technical assistance, likely from Russian specialists with experience in Soviet-era electronic warfare programs, has apparently filled critical knowledge gaps that Iranian indigenous programs could not address independently. The Russian connection is particularly significant because Soviet military doctrine emphasized electromagnetic warfare to a far greater degree than Western military planning, viewing it as a force equalizer against technologically superior NATO forces. The technical approaches that Russian specialists developed during the Cold War have apparently been adapted and modernized by Iranian engineers, producing capabilities that Western forces never encountered during the Cold War and therefore never developed comprehensive defenses against. The Chinese dimension cannot be excluded from the technical assessment. Chinese military research into electromagnetic warfare has been extensive and increasingly sophisticated, and China maintains substantial defense industrial cooperation with Iran. Components with Chinese manufacturing signatures have been identified in previous Iranian weapon systems, and similar supply chains may underlie the electromagnetic warfare capability now being observed. The operational testing that Iran conducted prior to this deployment against Israeli forces remains uncertain. Developing a capability of this complexity requires extensive testing against representative targets to validate effectiveness and refine attack parameters. Iran may have conducted testing against their own Russian-supplied aircraft, against mock-ups of Western designs, or in cooperation with allies who could provide access to target systems. The apparent effectiveness against multiple Israeli aircraft types simultaneously suggests thorough testing that characterized vulnerabilities across a range of platforms. The strategic calculus behind Iran's decision to reveal this capability now, rather than holding it in reserve for a potential future conflict, indicates confidence that the capability advantage will not be quickly negated by Western countermeasures. Iran has accepted that revealing the system allows adversaries to begin developing defenses, which suggests either that they assess defenses will take longer to deploy than the strategic window they seek to exploit, or that this capability is one layer of a more comprehensive electromagnetic warfare program with additional undisclosed capabilities. The cost-exchange ratio that this capability represents is strategically devastating for Israel. Iranian investment in the research, development, and deployment of these electromagnetic warfare systems likely totals in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Israeli investment in the aircraft that those systems can now disable exceeds $20 billion. The defensive countermeasures and aircraft modifications required to restore operational security against this threat will cost billions more. Iran has achieved a strategic effect against Israeli air power at a fraction of the cost that Israel incurred to build that air power, fundamentally altering the economic sustainability of the military technology competition. The psychological dimension of this technical revelation extends beyond immediate military calculations. Israeli defense planning has operated for decades under the assumption that technological superiority provided strategic insurance against numerical disadvantages in the region. That assumption has been directly challenged by an adversary demonstrating capabilities that negate Israel's most expensive and sophisticated weapon system through means that do not require matching Israel's technology investments platform for platform. The resulting uncertainty about what other undisclosed capabilities Iran may possess creates strategic paralysis that extends far beyond the immediate 12-hour restoration timeline. Act 3. Operational consequences, 2,600 words. The tactical situation that Israeli Defense Forces commanders confront in the 12 hours following this electromagnetic attack represents a compression of vulnerabilities across multiple operational domains simultaneously. At the most immediate level, Israeli air defense networks designed to intercept incoming threats rely fundamentally on the assumption that Israeli combat aircraft will be available to conduct combat air patrol missions, intercept hostile aircraft, and strike launch platforms before saturation attacks overwhelm ground-based missile defenses. That assumption is no longer operative while 300 aircraft remain non-functional. The Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow missile defense systems that constitute Israel's layered defensive architecture possess fixed ammunition inventories that can be exhausted through sustained salvo attacks. The systems were designed and optimized under the operational concept that Israeli Air Force would degrade enemy launch capabilities before saturation thresholds were reached. With Israeli air power temporarily disabled, the defensive calculation shifts entirely to ground-based intercept capabilities against potentially unlimited offensive salvos, a mathematical equation that invariably favors the attacker. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force possesses inventory estimates suggesting 3,000 ballistic missiles of various ranges and 2,000 cruise missiles and large drones suitable for strategic attack. Hezbollah maintains an estimated 150,000 rockets and missiles in southern Lebanon. Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas retain several thousand rockets in Gaza despite years of Israeli operations to degrade stockpiles. The Syrian military, while degraded by civil war, maintains ballistic missile capabilities. The combined inventory of potential adversary munitions exceeds Israeli defensive intercept capacity by orders of magnitude. The current 12-hour vulnerability window may be too brief for adversaries to coordinate and execute large-scale attacks exploiting Israeli air power absence, but the demonstrated vulnerability creates strategic opportunities that extend beyond immediate tactical exploitation. Regional adversaries now understand that Israeli air superiority is not a constant condition, but a variable that Iran can manipulate through electromagnetic warfare. This knowledge fundamentally changes the operational planning timeline for any future conflict. Israeli strike planning against Iranian nuclear facilities, which has been actively maintained as a credible military option for over a decade, rested on assumptions about Israeli ability to achieve air superiority throughout the mission duration. The strike package would require multiple waves of aircraft conducting suppression of enemy air defenses, electronic warfare, strike operations, battle damage assessment, and combat air patrol across several hours of sustained operations deep in Iranian airspace. Any electromagnetic warfare capability that can disable aircraft systems during critical mission phases transforms a challenging but potentially feasible operation into a catastrophically risky gamble. The mission planning would now require either accepting that electromagnetic attack could disable portions of the strike package mid-mission, or developing and deploying comprehensive electromagnetic countermeasures before any operation could proceed. The timeline for countermeasure development extends to months or years, effectively removing the preventive strike option from Israeli immediate response capabilities, regardless of intelligence about Iranian nuclear progress. The degradation of preventive strike credibility has immediate deterrence implications. Iranian nuclear decision-makers, who previously calculated under the assumption that Israeli strikes represented a genuine constraint on weapons development timeline, now operate with reduced concern about that constraint. The pace of Iranian nuclear activities is likely to accelerate in response to the reduced credibility of Israeli military deterrence, creating a paradoxical situation where Israeli military setbacks directly enable the nuclear developments those military capabilities were meant to prevent. The American military response options to support Israeli capabilities during this vulnerability window face severe constraints. The United States maintains substantial air power in the region through carrier strike groups and land-based aircraft in Gulf states, but American aircraft suffer the same electromagnetic warfare vulnerabilities that Israeli platforms just experienced. Deploying American air power as a substitute for disabled Israeli capabilities simply presents additional targets for Iranian electromagnetic attack without fundamentally solving the vulnerability problem. The defensive countermeasures that American and Israeli engineers can deploy in a 12-hour emergency timeline are limited to software patches and procedural modifications rather than hardware changes that would require aircraft to be taken offline for extended modification periods. Software patches can address some firmware corruption issues but cannot solve fundamental hardware vulnerabilities to electromagnetic attack. Procedural modifications such as altered flight profiles, reduced electromagnetic emissions, or distributed operations can mitigate but not eliminate the vulnerability. The intelligence collection implications of this event extend across multiple domains. Israeli and American signals intelligence services are conducting emergency analysis of electromagnetic signatures associated with the Iranian attack, attempting to characterize the attack waveforms and identify the transmission sources. This analysis will inform both immediate defensive measures and longer-term countermeasure development. However, the Iranians operated the system for approximately 90 seconds before deactivating, providing limited collection opportunity against a capability that has apparently been under development for years without detection. The human intelligence requirements to understand Iranian electromagnetic warfare program details have suddenly become critical priorities for Israeli and American intelligence services. Recruitment operations targeting Iranian scientists, engineers, and military personnel with knowledge of the program will intensify dramatically. Technical intelligence collection through cyber operations against Iranian defense research networks will expand. Liaison relationships with third-party intelligence services that may have independent collection on Iranian programs will be leveraged. This intelligence surge may yield results over months, but provides no assistance during the current 12-hour crisis window. The regional force posture adjustments that this event triggers will reshape American and Israeli military presence across the Middle East. Additional electronic warfare aircraft, likely EA-18G Growlers from American carrier air wings, will be surged to the region to provide electromagnetic warfare support that Israeli forces currently lack. Ground-based electronic warfare systems will be repositioned to provide coverage over Israeli territory. Air defense batteries will shift to higher alert postures, anticipating potential exploitation of the vulnerability window. These force posture changes consume military resources, create operational tempo strain on personnel and equipment, and signal strategic concern to adversaries and allies alike. Regional partners who have been considering defense cooperation with Israel or the United States will reassess those relationships based on the demonstrated vulnerability of Western military technology to Iranian capabilities. The diplomatic reverberations of a military technical setback propagate through alliance structures as rapidly as the tactical consequences affect operational planning. The aircraft recovery operations that Israeli Air Force maintenance personnel are conducting against the 12-hour deadline face cascading technical challenges. Each aircraft must be individually diagnosed to determine whether failures are recoverable through software resets or represent permanent hardware damage requiring component replacement. The diagnostic timeline for complex integrated avionics systems can extend to days under normal circumstances, but must be compressed to hours in the current crisis. The rushed timeline increases risk of incomplete diagnosis that returns aircraft to service with latent failures that could manifest during combat operations. The logistics chain to support recovery operations is being stressed by simultaneous demands across 6 air bases for technical personnel, diagnostic equipment, and replacement components. Israeli Air Force maintenance capacity was designed for peacetime operations where aircraft failures occur randomly and can be addressed sequentially. The current situation presents correlated failures across 300 aircraft simultaneously, overwhelming standard maintenance capacity and requiring emergency mobilization of reserve maintainers and civilian contractor support. The pilot readiness implications extend beyond aircraft availability. Combat pilots require recurrent training to maintain proficiency in complex missions, and Israeli pilots have just experienced a psychological shock that their most sophisticated aircraft can be disabled by adversary action they cannot detect, predict, or counter through traditional tactics. The mental model that pilots maintain about their aircraft's capabilities and vulnerabilities has been fundamentally disrupted. Restoring pilot confidence in their platforms will require not just technical fixes, but transparent communication about what went wrong, what has been done to address it, and what residual vulnerabilities remain. The operational planning for any near-term Israeli military operations must now incorporate electromagnetic warfare vulnerability as a central constraint rather than a peripheral consideration. Mission planning that previously focused on threats from kinetic weapons, surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft artillery, enemy fighters must expand to address electromagnetic attack as an equal or greater threat. Flight profiles, timing, routing, and tactics must be adapted to minimize electromagnetic warfare exposure, potentially compromising mission effectiveness to achieve acceptable survivability. The cascade of operational consequences extends from tactical aircraft availability through strategic deterrence credibility, creating a comprehensive degradation of Israeli military posture that will persist long after the immediate 12-hour crisis concludes. The restoration of nominal aircraft functionality does not restore the pre-attack security environment because the vulnerability has been exposed and the strategic uncertainty about future Iranian electromagnetic warfare employment remains.